Find your seat. Good morning. So, this is very exciting. Welcome, everyone, to the first Transformative Technology Conference. It's such a pleasure to be here. I can't even begin to describe. I'll probably say that 10 times over the course of the weekend. My name is Mikey. I'm one of the few people that are co-organizing this event for all of you. And it's such an honor to be in this incredible room full of people here. And this section that we're about to start of the conference is what we're calling the pre-conference summit. And the idea behind the pre-conference summit and a number of the activities that we have throughout the conference are an effort to try to do something in addition to your typical speaker audience interaction. And not just that, with regards to this summit, this is created based on this idea that this space, transformative technology, is in many ways and for many people a totally new concept. Now, there is a lot of history there. You could look at the history of biofeedback and neurofeedback, and there's been a lot of development. But as far as this angle, this perspective on mainstream consumer culture, bringing this into this mass market, this concept of transformative technology, especially in this sort of Silicon Valley environment, is really very new for most people. And you could almost think of it as the rebirth, the second generation of a lot of these older ideas. And so in that spirit, what we're interested in is not stamping down a definition and telling you what transformative technology is. Instead, we want to make it a conversation. We want to make it interactive. We want to bring together this group in an interactive process in order to self-generate the sense, the vision of what this space can be. But the outcome of this process, this summit, which we're going to hear details about in a second of how it's structured, the outcome of this summit is not a definition. It's not a set of directions. What it actually is a set of questions. A set of questions broken up into these four topic areas: definitions, outcomes, methods, and ethics. And in each of these four topic areas, what we're trying to do is define which direction we are pointing. Because transformative technology is not a thing, it's a space of inquiry. It's a direction of exploration. And in defining a direction of exploration, what you actually need to do is create the questions, the direction that you look, the vectors, the way that you face. And so the structure of this summit is, and Joe will go into detail, is breaking up into group based on these four topics. And for each of these topics, ultimately coming up with the 5 defining questions for that topic. And in the end of this session, the hope is that we have a document that is available for everyone that has the 20 key questions that help to shape and direct this space of transformative technology. Does that make sense for everyone? Cool. So, we have someone very special who's going to be leading this session. I have an intro I love to give for him. I've probably given it a couple times now. Sorry, Joe, you have to hear this again. But Joe Hudson is a really special person because he's one of the few people I've met that really straddles on one side the space of investment. He's a venture capitalist, the space of technology, the space of entrepreneurship. And on the other side, the space of deep personal transformation and wisdom. And I first met Joe when I was actually helping to co-found the Transformative Technology Lab here. And we were in the very early stages of looking for funding. And Joe was the first person that I met with, the first venture capitalist that I met with. And so this was like a big deal. I was pretty nervous, my first big pitch, for a venture capitalist. And we met at a restaurant. We sat down for lunch, and we totally hit it off. We're having a great conversation, really personal, really meaningful. And I'm like, oh, I love this guy. This is amazing. And about 40 minutes into it, kind of, leisurely says, okay, so tell me, what's your project? What's your interest? The invitation for the pitch. And so immediately my body sort of clenches, and I'm like, okay, now's the time. I got to make this count. And so I look at him and I start into my pitch. And within about 7 words, very calmly, he looks at me and he says, I'm noticing my body contracting right now. It's like, no judgment. I'm just letting you know. and, and immediately I stopped, took a deep breath, and shifted the entire course of the conversation. And Joe has taught me so much about open, vulnerable, honest communication. And he does a lot of work in groups, structuring that kind of communication. And we're very lucky to have him here today to lead us in this group conversation. So please welcome Joe Hudson.
Thanks, Mikey. Hey, everybody. Wow. Hi. I can't see your faces. I want to see your faces before I start talking. Yeah. So the question that we're in, see if I can get some of the glare off here. The question that we're in, or there's a saying, and the saying goes, and this is one of my favorite sayings these days, is in the age of Google, it's not what you know, it's what questions you ask. And a good story about this, 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of hit me in a visceral level, grokked it in a way that I hadn't grokked it before. And my wife, I was doing sustainable agriculture venture capital, and my wife is a Sonoma Valley woman, and she, very big into organic and that kind of thing. And I come home and she says, "Did you hear Monsanto bought this bee think tank, and they're going to genetically modify bees?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I just heard about that they acquired a company that was a bee company that was already tinkering with bees." And and so we got on Google and we put in Monsanto bee, and there was like 200 hits, and we went through them, and it was all about how Monsanto was going to take over the world with bees. And then we changed the search and we said Monsanto bee acquisition. And then there was 200 links about how Monsanto strategically acquired a bee company that was already genetically modifying bees or something to that degree. And that was when it hit me in this real way. It's like the world that you see is really based not on what you know as much as what questions you ask. So spiritual people, for lack of a better term, are teachers, non-dual teachers have known this for years. And there's kind of the ascending and the descending traditions. And in the ascending traditions, there's really just 2 forms of tools that are used generally. One is meditative forms, and the other is inquiry forms. So Socrates is a good early example, but in the Hindu tradition, there's Vikar, and today there's Byron Katie, whose work really is just 4 questions. And there's a great mental experiment that I'd love to put you through so you can understand exactly why inquiry is so powerful in spiritual tradition. So if you could all shut your eyes for a minute. And I just want you to get into a state of knowing, right? So the state of knowing, I don't need you to know anything in specifics, right? But just know, you're certain. Just feel that certainty, feel that knowing. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to switch over a little bit and be in a question of wonder. Be in a curiosity. Feel what that is like in your system, right? And I think for many of you, you probably felt your body relax, an openness of mind, a change in your physiology. And this is why being in wonder, being in the question, is so important to spiritual traditions. And modern neurology tells us that when we're more relaxed, we have higher capacity to learn when the amygdala is not engaged. Um, and we're calm, our capacity of left and right brain to speak to one another increases. And so our ability to learn also increases with that. So here's a really another cool experiment. Close your eyes again. And once again, be in that state of wonder, be in that state of curiosity, of not knowing. And then just introduce the thought that you need to know. Introduce the thought that if you don't know, something bad is going to happen. And you can notice that reverse thing happen going from opening to closing in the body and the physiology. And so even the knowing that you need to know can completely corrupt in its own way the not knowing or the wonder that's happening. So interestingly, it's not just the power of a question doesn't just relate to spirituality. It also relates to relationship. So if you look around the room, find a person, take a look at them for a minute, and see what you know about them. Right? So something personal, like the way that guy's dressed, he wants to stand out, or the way that that person's got a crinkled forehead. They are very judgmental of what Joe's saying right now. Whatever. So just take a look and see what you know about them. Right? I can't see if everybody's looking around, but I think people are still just looking at me. So come on, come on, right? Yeah. And then think about how that relationship's going to go from there. How's that relationship going to go from you knowing something about them, right? And now do the exact same exercise, but instead of thinking what you know about them, think about what's curious about them. So again, find somebody in the room and think to yourself, where did this person come from? What made them think? What they made them do? What made them dress in those funny clothes? You know, what made Joe come up and be full of shit or whatever? Yeah. And then think about where that relationship's going to go from there, from that state of curiosity or that state of wonder. Right? It opens up this whole possibility in the relationship that wasn't available before. Science also knows really dramatically how the power of the right question. Uh, So if you're sitting there and there's three companies and one company says, our question is, how do we make a phone that the most people are going to use, that we can make the most money on? How do we build a phone that will make the most money on? The next company has the question, how do we make a phone that's incredibly easy to use, the most easy to use phone that we could possibly ever create? Right? And then the third is a question of how do we make a phone that people love, that they love to use, that they enjoy using? And from those three questions, three different phones are going to arise, right? That the question really defines the solution. We also see this in business, right? In business, um, there's a case study in the 80s or so. There was this kind of the war of all the drugstores. The chain drugstores were starting to pop up: Rite Aid, Walgreens, CVS, etc. And Walgreens was far away the winner. And in business, uh, metrics really are the question of the business, right? What you're measuring to determine how you're doing is really the question that you're living in the business. And what most of the pharmacies that didn't get the high growth were asking were, how much money are we making per store? That was the big question. But for Walgreens, it was a different question. It was, how much money is each customer spending when they come into the store? Completely different question, completely different systems were built to answer it. And because that question had them focused on the customer, not on the revenue, they had a much deeper and faster growth rate. So you can just see the power of a question. But our minds say, yeah, but Joe, isn't it important to know? Isn't it also important to know? And I can't argue with that. But what I can argue with is how powerful knowing actually is. Right? So what we know, I'm not good with names, I'm horrible, but there was somewhere in the 60s, 70s or something, there was a mathematician who logically proved that all forms of logic either require a postulate that can't be proven, or they contradict themselves at some point. So the thing we know about rationality, about forms of logic, is that they are incomplete and or contradictory. The other thing we know neurologically about rationality is, you hear this beautiful, I wish that person would just make more rational decisions, or, oh, I made an emotional decision. And we have this concept that rational decisions are better than emotional decisions. But modern neurology proves that that's just not true. When somebody gets the part of their brain damaged that allows them to be emotional, allows them to have emotions, they stop making decisions. They're just incapable of making decisions. Right? So there's a famous case study of a guy who had this damage. He was in a happy marriage. Apparently, he had successful businesses that could be measured. He was an entrepreneur, and when that brain damage happened, he couldn't make decisions any longer. His marriage fell apart. His businesses fell apart. It took him 2 hours to decide where he was going to go have lunch. So we actually need our emotional capabilities, and it's not rationality that helps us make decisions. So on one hand, you've got something that you know is incomplete and you know is inconsistent, that you know doesn't create as good of relationships, that doesn't create as pleasant of a physiological state, and that's called knowing. And we know that the question can be the powerful thing that helps us design the right product, the right tools for humanity, the right business that helps us have a deeper form of relationship with one another, that helps us understand and have a deep form of wisdom that knowing can never do. There's a very esoteric book by a guy named Stephen Harrison. I remembered his name. I've read so many of his books, I can't forget. And he has this. The name of one of his books is "Coming to the End of the Spiritual Search: Questions for Your Life's Answers." And in his, just in the title, you know that he's basically saying the end of a spiritual search is when you're questioning, not when you're knowing.